So you've started a new character, or maybe you are even new to New World. Well, it can be kind of tricky to figure out which weapon or what role is best for you, and in today's video I'm going to be going over those roles as well as how I would suggest to go about picking which weapon is best for you. As always, before we fully get into today's video, I do just want to say if this video helps you out, or if you just like it, please drop it a like. It really does help me out a lot. And if you want to see more content like this, including more build videos, loot videos, beginner videos, stuff like that, definitely subscribe to the channel so you know when those videos do go live. I also stream throughout the week over on Twitch and YouTube, so definitely stop by stream, say hello, lurk, anything like that. We would love to have you. But let's get into today's video. Alright, so we are over here on my alt character on Marama, which actually I've only played one day, got to level 15, and haven't really touched it since I'm working on my EU character. But what I wanted to talk about is the fact that it can be really tricky for a new player or even just a new character to decide what role and what weapons are best for you to start with, because you do want to make sure you're leveling up those weapons pretty early on in order to get the absolute most out of them for the later game. So first we're going to go over the different roles within this game. Because New World is a classless system, it can be kind of tricky for some people to figure out which weapons are best to pair together and stuff like that, and that's where today we are going to go over that. So like a lot of other games, there is a DPS, a tank, and a healer role in the game. Now, like I said, it's not a classed system, so really you can kind of play any of those three with various different combinations, some of the weapons, working for multiple different types of roles, and it can be kind of tricky to decide what is best for you. So starting with the DPS role is probably the most open-ended role. A lot of different weapons are going to work for that, including your sword and shield, your rapier, your hatchet, your flail and shield, pretty much every single weapon, even sometimes a life staff. I'm not usually going to suggest the life staff for a DPS, but every single weapon can be used for a DPS role depending on what you enjoy the most. So DPS is definitely the most open, broad role out there, and that's why we see the absolute most people playing that as well. Is you can run light, medium, or heavy armor. You can run literally anything you want as far as that role goes, and you can probably make it work as long as you have the right perks and build together. Now next we're going to talk about the tank, and the tanking role, as many of you know, especially for the PvE side, is going to be kind of your heavier armor, higher HP. In New World, you're going to have taunts and stuff connected to some of the weapons, so we'll use Sword and Shield as an example. When you look at certain abilities, and it's not just Sword and Shield, it's for a lot of different weapons, they will actually have different taunts. And at the bottom, we'll look at this Defender's Resolve, and at the bottom there, you'll see it says Taunt Gem Compatible. If it says that, you are essentially able to taunt, and it will explain what that specific taunt does for you. So some weapons will have multiple taunts, some will have taunts that aren't that great. It just kind of depends. But as a tank, you are going heavy armor almost all the time. I've seen a few quirky builds using, maybe medium or light, but almost always you're going to see a tank in heavy armor, pretty high con, so pretty high HP. And then they're going to be using either like a sword and shield, flail and shield, great sword, hammer, anything like that. So it's not quite as broad as like the DPS, because as a tank, you're probably not going to be running bow or musket. You might use some mage weapons depending on, how quirky your build is. You just want to check each individual weapon and see which ones actually have the taunt. So like here with the Void Gauntlet, it does have a taunt with the Scream, and the Petrifying Scream isn't that great of a taunt. It does work, but it's also a fairly long cooldown for a taunt, so it's not the best, but you could definitely get away with it. Next, we are going to talk about the healer role. So if you are more of a support type of a player and like more of that support gameplay, you pretty much have one main primary weapon, and that is going to be your life staff. Your life staff is everything. It is currently the only primary healing weapon in the game. The devs have said that they are eventually going to be shaking up the life staff and changing some things on the tree, but I don't know when that's going to be. It might not be for quite a while. We'll see. But Life Staff is going to be your primary. So if you love the Life Staff, you love support and healing, this is the weapon that you have to go with pretty much. And then for your secondaries, you have a lot of options. Now for myself, for PvE, I'm usually going to go with Flail and Shield or the Void Gauntlet. Void Gauntlet and Flail will actually scale with Focus, which is the same as the Life Staff, which we're going to get into that a little bit later. But just so you know, the Life Staff is your primary. Your secondary for PvE, at least, I would recommend the Void Gauntlet and Flail and Shield. Outside of that, if you're looking more at the PvP or just running around by yourself, you can definitely shake it up. My favorite weapon to run with Life Staff is a Warhammer, which I do have some build videos as far as that build goes, and it is very, very fun, especially if you are more of a solo player, just kind of running around in open world, just trying to quest and stuff. The hammer can come in handy quite often. So I do highly recommend trying some different secondaries with your Life Staff. But like I said, if you're doing dungeons and PvE like that, where you're in more of a group setting, the Flail or the Void Gauntlet can be very, very beneficial, not only to yourself, but to the whole group. So those are the three main roles that we're looking at. Like I said, we have the DPS, which is going to be more broad. Pretty much every single weapon here is going to work for a DPS in some way or another, depending on your build. For tank, you're a little bit more limited to mainly just your melee weapons, especially your two-handeds, and then obviously your two weapons that involve a shield, with occasionally, like I said, a hatchet, and you can definitely shake it up and try some other more quirky secondaries, but you want to make sure you have at least one weapon that has a decent cooldown on your taunts. For healer, I mean, Life Staff is the way to go. There's not really too many other options, but that's where have a lot of fun with your secondary. Don't necessarily have to fall into a certain meta of what everyone's running. I've found that Life Staff can work really well with a lot of different secondary weapons. I've used pretty much every single secondary, and I definitely have some that I wouldn't suggest as much. You know, musket and bow, not as great. Anything with a shield can be tricky. With Flail and Shield, you can actually run the Flail on its own. None of its abilities actually rely on the shield, outside of some passives. And then Sword and Shield, the tricky part is a lot of these, all of the defender side is going to involve a shield. So if you were to run it without your shield, you'd end up missing out on a good chunk of your abilities, and that is just not great. So it can be a little bit tricky sometimes figuring out what secondary works for you, but if you are a healer and you want to run something outside of like the just main meta of what everyone runs, definitely just start playing around with some of these other weapons, slot in an amber, and you should be good to go. All right, so we've gone over the three different roles that are available in the game that you can kind of decide from there what you want to play. But first, you may want to just look at the weapons themselves and figure out what is best for you. And usually when someone comes in, I've had a few people coming into chat that are new players, and they'll ask, you know, what weapon should I pick? Is it a class system? Like, am I stuck with that weapon? And the way New World is actually set up is a way that you can really hop around and play all these different weapons. Now, this is my alt character, so I have very, very few weapons, barely even leveled at all. On my main account, though, what I do try to do is level every single weapon. So then I have that option of running any build that I want, and kind of go from there. So usually what I'm going to say for any new player, and what I've been telling a lot of people, is first play around with all the different weapons. Figure out which weapon you like, and figure out what's most fun for you. Now, it may come down to you want to play a certain role, whether that's DPS, tank, or healer, and then obviously that's going to dictate a little bit more what you're going to go with. So like I said earlier, if you're going to be a healer, you have to have a Life Staff. Otherwise, if you're a tank, you have to make sure you just at least have, you know, 1 or 2 taunts minimum, so then you can pull aggro away from your group, especially away from your healer, because your healer will draw a lot of aggro. And then obviously, also like I said with the DPS, you can kind of play whatever you want. There's a lot of different combinations and options out there. So DPS is definitely the most broad. But when you are brand new to the game, definitely start by picking one weapon that is your favorite, that you have the absolute most fun with, right? So let's say it is a hammer, just for an example. You pick the hammer, you're having a lot of fun with it, and now you're thinking, well, what do I do for a secondary? And the way that we're going to look that up is go to the attributes here. When you're in your attributes, what you're going to do is find where the hammer is, and hammer scales with strength and only strength. But what you can do, and the way they have this laid out, is hover over this question mark icon. With this question mark icon, it's going to show you which weapons have the primary attribute being strength, and then any weapons that have a secondary attribute for that particular attribute. So in the case of strength, it has quite a few primary weapons that'll work for it: Warhammer, Great Axe, Sword, Hatchet, Blunderbuss, and Flail, with a secondary attribute for the Spear. So what that means is, because Warhammer only scales with strength, what you're going to get is you want to pick any weapons that fall into that category. Obviously, like I said earlier with my life staff build, it's a little bit different. You can actually utilize gems to change half of that damage. We're not going to get fully into that today, but what we are going to talk about is the fact that you can actually split your attributes. So as you can see, Spear has a secondary attribute in strength. Its primary is going to be dexterity. Now, dexterity is definitely an attribute that you can level up and have multiple different weapons, including a sword, hatchet, musket, rapier, spear, bow, musket. So a lot of people, what they'll do is, if they're on their bow or musket builds, is they'll run like a spear or a rapier, just because you get better scaling because it's a primary attribute. When you scale something with the secondary attribute, you do get, a damage increase, but it's not going to be to the extent as the primary. So really, like I said, once you pick that main weapon, that primary weapon that you really want to have a lot of fun with and go with, that's when you come to the attributes and start figuring out which attributes are shared within that weapon. So like I said, with Warhammer, you have quite a few different options. They're all going to be melee outside of the blunderbuss, but you do have some very, very good options to choose from. And then from there, you can go into, your equip load, so medium, light, or heavy, and all of that. So like I said, if you're a DPS, you have 3 different options though for that armor class, which will be the light, medium, and heavy. For tank, you're mostly going to be in heavy, and for healer, you're primarily going to be light, but I do see a couple of medium armor healers out there, but light typically is going to be best. So now that we've picked our most fun primary weapon, we understand vaguely what the attributes are, then you want to start picking your secondary and figuring out which weapon, for one, is fun for you, and 2, pairs well with that specific weapon. Now, some weapons, even though they share attributes, they might not be the best together for your playstyle or for the specific content that you're playing. But that does leave, a lot of room for you to grow and figure out what does work with it or what is fun for you. So like I said, take that primary, focus on that, and then go from there. So then we're going to look at what happens when we have these split attributes. Is it worth it to invest in both sides? So when we look at the specific attributes, we have strength, and each of these circles here is going to be a different perk that you get within that attribute just for leveling it up. So on this very low level character, I have over 25 strength, which gives me 5% light attack damage with my melee weapons. At 50, you get 10%, and so on and so forth. You're going to get different attribute bonuses as you level them up. So there's a lot of times where I'm going to split. So let's say we'll take a musket, for example. So musket primarily scales with dexterity, and then it is a secondary with intelligence. And so what I normally do, and this is just as an example so you have an idea of how you can split it, what I normally do with my musket is I'll get up to 150 int. And with the 150 int, that gives me a 10% elemental damage buff, gives me 10% damage to light and heavy elemental attacks, gives me the 5% damage increase to targets inflicted with a damage over time effect, which musket applies a lot of, and 5% damage increase to backstabs and random crit hits. So really, really good perks within int. And then I put everything else into dex outside of some con, and that gets me all the way up to the point where I can get a 15% crit chance while empowered, which you're empowered a good chunk of the time when you're running like bow or musket or anything like that. So you can actually split those attributes to make your build that much stronger. On top of that, once you hit that like 300 to 350 mark in the attribute, even if it's just your primary, the scaling of how much damage output you're going to be doing and how much stronger you're getting does scale back a bit. So sometimes splitting it on top of having those perks can be really, really beneficial for that specific build. Obviously, when you have weapons like the Warhammer that scales only with one specific attribute, you kind of just want to pump everything into that one attribute and then making sure you have enough con for your HP. So then what we're going to take a look at, we'll use spear as an example, just since we're talking with strength and dex. So with the spear, what I would probably recommend, let's say spear is your favorite, that's what you're starting with. I would take that and start with just only putting your attributes into dexterity. You want to just try to stack that spear to make it as strong as possible. Now, you could definitely down the road, once you hit maybe the 40 to 50 level area and you have a lot more attributes to play with, you could probably split it up, do a little bit of strength, so your light and maybe even your heavy attacks do a little bit more, and then the rest into dexterity, and again, making sure you have enough constitution that you are able to survive and not die in every situation or be at risk in every situation. So starting with your primary attribute will at least allow you to stack that damage in that particular weapon, get a good feel for it. It's going to take you a little while to get that weapon leveled up. And then in the meantime, you'll kind of be working on that secondary weapon that you're using, and then also gives you time to really look at the different perks that you're going to get out of each individual attribute, because there are some really, really good ones for specific builds, whereas then there's others that might not be so beneficial. So like I said, start with that primary attribute, just work on leveling that up, look at what perks you get with it, and then from there kind of decide, is it worth it to start splitting those attributes or not? A lot of times I wait until maybe you'll hit, 150 to 200 in your primary and then maybe invest a little bit in that secondary. Again, making sure your con is fine. And you do want to make sure you look at all the different con attributes because there are different bonuses. They have changed these up in the past. So with some of the big changes or big patches coming up, it is something that's worth checking on after any of the big patches, or check those patch notes to see if they happen to change anything. But that's what we're looking at as far as the different weapons. First, pick that weapon though that is most fun for you. That is the most important thing. You want to have fun with your weapon. Once you know which weapon you're picking, then from there you can maybe decide which role is best for you, and then also which armor weight. Because when we look at the armor weights, we'll hover over the top here where on mine it says heavy. It's going to show you all the positives and negatives of those specific armor equip loads. So with light, you get a base damage bonus of 20%, you get an outgoing healing bonus of 30%, and then your dodge is a quick roll that costs 50 stam, and so on and so forth. So you do have some options there. Light and heavy currently are very, very strong. You do see a few medium armor people out there though, or quite a few melees especially. So medium is still viable. It's just light and heavy have been so strong for a bit now that a lot of people are going with that. But again, it depends on the role that you're playing and how you want to play it. Because for myself, when I go bruiser, so I'm going full melee, I like to run heavy armor because it just makes me feel like I am, a big beefy bruiser at that point. I'm not great at light armor melee. I just don't like the feel of it as much. I'm not great with it, but it just doesn't feel as good to just have that like quick kind of hit and run type of a tactic with a melee attack. And I do try medium occasionally, not too often, just because like heavy is the way that I personally like to go, regardless of what that current meta is. That's just what I have fun with. So that is the most important thing though. Make sure you're having fun with it. Make sure you're picking weapons and equip loads that you really enjoy and that you have fun with in the game. At the start of a new world, whether it's a new character or a new player, it can be a little bit confusing or overwhelming to have all these options for the weapons and roles and all that. But hopefully today's video has really helped you out, because I have been getting more people asking, I'm new to the game, or I'm thinking about getting the game. I don't know what weapon to play. I don't know what role I would want to play. I wouldn't worry about the roles right away. I would worry about just finding which weapons are most fun for you, and then you'll kind of fall into whatever role you're really enjoying. Because like I said, between DPS and tank, a lot of those will kind of cross over where you might be able to play both roles at times. Healer obviously is its own separate deal. Within the DPS role though, you've got, dex users, you've got melees with the bruisers, you've got mages. There's a lot of different options for DPS, and that I think is a big reason why a lot of people go with DPS, especially in New World. It is classless. You can literally play whatever combination of weapons you want. So like I said earlier though, have fun with it, enjoy the game, enjoy that early game, because it only lasts for so long until you have to go and start another alt character. But really enjoy that early game, focus on that primary, get it leveled up, and like I said, just have fun with it. But that is going to do it for today's video, so until next time, I'll see you guys later.